Thank you. About 20 years ago, I got a call from my friend Michelle. She'd been having terrible headaches that woke her in the night. She had a scan and there was a tumor. The doctors were pretty sure it was benign and everything was going to be fine. But when they did surgery, they found something very different. Glioblastoma, the worst kind you can get. At that time, people did not survive it. A few weeks, maybe months later, we were together sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by her elementary school art supplies. We were working on our 10-year high school reunion, and she wrote the list of everything we needed to do with her incredible teacher handwriting. She hadn't talked much about her illness, and that was hard. She didn't want the people who loved her to feel worse, and they didn't want to make her feel worse. So everyone avoided the conversation. I said, I can go with you into the hard stuff. You don't have to tell me everything is going to be okay. And I don't have to tell you everything is going to be okay. We both know it's not going to be okay. I've always been good at having the hard conversations. I was an AIDS educator in college. I was a peer counselor. When my friends were worried about having an STD or being pregnant, they turned to me for help. I felt a calling for that kind of conversation. And it turns out I was being prepared for a different kind of calling, working at a Jewish mortuary, helping people put their funeral plans in place long before they're needed. I didn't have a background in social work or psychology, and I knew next to nothing about Jewish funeral and mourning tradition. But when I heard about the job, I knew it was exactly what I was supposed to be doing. And in doing my life's work, I've become an evangelist for Jewish funeral and mourning tradition. I wasn't always this intense about Jewish ritual. I went to religious school and Jewish summer camp. I had a cursory understanding of Judaism, and to be quite honest, it didn't really speak to me. It didn't really know anything. When I first started my work, I heard about something called tahara, a ritual washing, and I thought, oh, that pitcher of water I've seen on the porch of the Shiva house, that must be the tahara. Well, as some of you know, tahara is actually a moving ceremony of being cleansed and purified by three people of the same gender who are so committed to doing this, caring for someone who can never repay the favor. It's a spiritual cycle. When we're born, we have our first bath, and after we die, we have our last. I feel like I'm fulfilling my life's mission by bringing these 5,000-year-old traditions into our present-day community. I continue with that mission because I've seen people in pain, and I know these rituals can help. Here I am talking about something nobody wants to discuss. When people come to me, they may be very nervous about having the conversation. But when we're done, and they've structured what comes next for after their death, they're so much at peace. And when I see their family at that time, they're so grateful to have been given this incredible gift, a plan for dealing with the death. They don't have to make decisions on the worst day of their life when they're least able to think. When someone dies, we're in shock, denial, pain, grief. We're weighed down. It's the worst time to try to figure out how to honor the loved one who died and honor our own bereavement needs. Typically, we're in such turmoil, we have no clue what those needs are. Jewish tradition offers us the guideposts on the path of bereavement. It allows us to feel our experience, even though it's painful. I come across so many people who say stuff like, I don't need a funeral. When you're dead, you're dead. What they're not taking into account is the funeral ritual and mourning traditions have very little to do with the person who died. They're actually for the people we leave behind. That's something we understand intellectually, but we don't get it on a deeper level. We say stuff like, what mom would have wanted. And though it's wonderful to respect our loved ones' wishes, it's also important to respect our own need to grieve. So even if mom wouldn't have wanted us to make a big deal, we benefit by meeting the deeply human need to mourn, surrounded by our family and friends, and by following the customs that have been serving our people for thousands of years, we get needs met that we didn't even know existed. I worked with a woman who told her family not to have a funeral for her. And on the day of her death, they followed her wishes. They really needed to publicly honor her and to grieve that way. And so they got a huge obituary in the newspaper. She hadn't told them not to do that. When her son came to pick up the urn, I asked him if the family had any plans, and he said, "Maybe we'll have dinner together." As someone who sees the power of Jewish ritual, I encourage them to do something to help them create a new normal without her, maybe an informal shiva. As I said this, he hugged me so tight. He realized he had permission to grieve. His story reminds me of one from Leviticus. On the day Aaron was to be installed as high priest, his sons did something they weren't supposed to do, and they were struck down. And Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Itamar, "Do not bare your heads, do not tear your clothes, so that you won't die, and God's anger won't destroy the entire community." Without ritual to fall back on, not even able to tear their clothes in anguish, Aaron and his two remaining sons, and one imagines his wife too, had no way to express their pain, anger, grief. Without ritual, Aaron was silent. Though our society would really like to ignore death and prettify it with a celebration of life, Jewish tradition does not sugarcoat the pain. As we shovel dirt into the grave, hearing it hit the casket, we feel it deep in our hearts. The Hess Bed, which is the Jewish version of the eulogy, is meant to break down the armor we use to protect ourselves. A successful Hess Bed is one that causes as many tears as possible. Our sages understood that the only way to heal our wounds is to bring them to the surface. Shiva gives us the time and space we need to process the loss surrounded by our family and friends. We don't work, we just sit and think and reflect and tell stories and keep each other company. Shloshim is when we're just easing back into our life. We're at work, but we're not going to parties, probably refraining from music. Most likely in the first 30 days of our bereavement, we don't want to be doing those things anyway. And when people say, "It's been a few weeks, you should be over it by now," can you believe people say stuff like that? It's helpful to be reminded that mourning is a much longer process than our fast-paced society acknowledges. Jews like me, who are not religious, may not think to access these rituals, even if they know they exist. We often think that the rituals are only for people who live an observant life. If we are given instruction by the loved one who died to follow Jewish custom, we're much better able to navigate the desert of our grief. A great example of this comes from the Torah. It's Jacob's family. You'll remember this story. His sons told him that Joseph had been eaten by a wild animal, when actually they had sold him into slavery. Many years later, the family is reunited in Egypt. Joseph has become right hand to the Pharaoh. Jacob dies there, and his family fulfills his wish to be buried in Canaan in the family plot. It would have been so much easier to be buried in Egypt, where he died. Jacob's request can be seen as a ruse to get his family to work through the pain of his death and the pain of their incredibly difficult childhood. The family came together, and in performing the ritual, they found healing. Joseph spoke kindly to them, comforted them, and committed to healing them and sustaining their little ones. In this case, the rituals were a glue that brought a fractured family together. The rituals are also incredibly important for close families. Many years ago, I worked with a wonderful couple, Ernie and Rita. They believe so strongly in the value of prearranged funeral planning that they gave a video testimonial for our website. Recently, Rita was in the hospital. On the day before she was supposed to come home, she died. As you can imagine, her family was completely shocked. When they came to the funeral home, I asked them where they'd like to sit while we waited for a few other family members to arrive. Did they want to stay here, go upstairs? Their daughter said, "It's too many choices. I really can't handle making any decisions right now." Thank God her parents, as an act of love, gave her the path of ritual for exactly this time. On the day of a death, and we never know when that will be, people are exhausted, they're overwhelmed, which is why I find myself encouraging you to give your loved ones a healthy and healing bereavement by creating a plan, making use of Jewish tradition at the time of your death. I made a plan for myself when I was 42. When I say that, people always respond, "Well, you're in the business." What I've learned in this business is that we're all mortal. We never know when our death will come, just that we will die. I want my husband, my children, my friends to be able to grieve as they need. The structure of ritual and 5,000 years of tradition is my final gift to them. When Michelle got her terminal diagnosis, I saw up close how far people will go to avoid talking about the hard stuff. Have the hard conversations now. Talk to your loved ones about how and why Jewish tradition is helpful in the face of death. So on that very difficult day and the many that follow, the people you love, the people who love you, will have the plan to lean on when they need it most. Thank you. Thank you.